Hi everyone and welcome. Yeah, today I would like to do a quick chat about a most dangerous book, Tacitus's Germania from the Roman Empire to the Third Reich, and this is by Christopher B. Krebs, and it was published originally in 2011 here in the U.S. There is the cover. Hope you can see that. I sat down to do this video and it looks like we're getting ready to have a big thunderstorm, so my natural light is a little off maybe, and also don't be shocked if you hear thunder. That's what it will be. But yeah, a most dangerous book. This book is about the journey through time of the Germania, it's called, by Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman historian, and this book was originally written in about 98 AD, the year 98, and it was written by Tacitus as sort of an explanation of the Germans. Now, the Germans at the time were a lot of different tribes. They were not the Germans that we think of today. But they were all north, they all lived in this area roughly north of the empire, Roman Empire, where Germany and Austria is now, basically, and lots more of other geography. And then east of the Rhine, so not Gaul, not west, not what is now France, but east of that. And he wrote this sort of general, relatively short book about Germania, and it was for a Roman audience, and it was really sort of to give an idea of what these people were like. They were considered, wildly barbarian, and in Tacitus's account, it's not real. Parts of it are sort of complementary. There's several common themes, like the way that the people look: tall, slim, muscular, healthy, robust, blonde, blue eyes. They are said to have originated in that spot, meaning they originated there. They didn't come from somewhere else. They're indigenous to where they are. And also that they haven't intermarried, that they are, pure as far as that goes. They don't intermarry with other people around them. That other people don't go there, I guess. And that they're loyal and very courageous. They have a very egalitarian sort of life. Women have a certain status there. They're very, I guess, not chaste is not the right word, but they're very faithful. So like adultery is one of the biggest kind of crimes, I guess. So these are kind of this is an overview really of what Tacitus says. Well, the story, right? Ultimately, this was written in 98. The Roman Empire eventually ceases to exist in the western part of Europe. And I think the last time the book is heard from, it seems to me, it's in this book, I can't remember the exact year and I didn't look it up, but around 200 or 400, I think, was the last year this was heard from. And then the book disappeared and was not heard from or talked about or referenced again for 1,000 years. So then fast forward to the early 15th century of Italy. So this is around 1400, early 1400s. It comes to light that there might be a copy of this work. The work was known to have existed due to references. It's referenced in other works, but it was assumed that it was lost. And during this late medieval kind of Renaissance era, there was the humanists of that era really were on a search for these old classic texts. And so they go on this sort of, the Italians, the humanists really go on this sort of mad search to try to acquire this, the Germania, from this monastery in Germany that claims to have it. Several years passed, and this book goes into the sort of the the different people that passed through trying to get it. Ultimately, it did in about 1425 make its way back into circulation, and there it began its journey again through time and multiple reinterpretations. So, we had the Italian humanists, and then the German humanists got a hold of it, and whoa, suddenly they have this history of this narrative of what they consider their beginnings. And so they take that and sort of run with it. One thing that the ancient Germans had practiced was apparently periodically human sacrifice. It's mentioned in Tacitus. This gets translated out of some of the the humanist versions, because what's happening is people want, especially the German humanists, want to kind of mold this into their own it's their own cultural narrative at this point. So they kind of sort of take it and run with it. Then time passes. Just giving you a very brief sort of overview. This is not the details that are in this book, but the Enlightenment comes along, where there is this renewed interest in science and learning and this sort of thing. At this point, the Germania also undergoes another shift and reinterpretation through the light of, in some cases, the sort of the special nature of the German people, that they didn't come from somewhere else. They've always been sort of insulated on themselves, and that their culture was pure. And then ultimately, the 19th century comes around. We get Charles Darwin. We get evolutionary theory. Science expands. Also, what happens in this period is racial theory. It starts in the Enlightenment, and then it just blossoms really after evolution and Darwin, where this idea of German people as being pure, they have not been adulterated from outside. Anyway, they have this sort of narrative that's sort of built on, or it changes. The Germania sort of changes, to prop up these kind of ideas. By the time we get to the early 20th century, this is kind of full-blown racial ideas. The shock of losing World War I, all the tragedy of World War I, leaves the German culture, the people in the German culture, sort of grasping for identity and for to make sense of themselves again. The nationalists, the German nation did not become a nation even until the 19th century. So this whole Germania was helped to use to sort of foster this idea of nationalism. Well, then through the 20th century, there was this movement called Völkisch movement. It was Volk, which is folk. It's like a folk movement, because the ideal at this time was to go back to this Germania, this like pure time when people were, it was the common people. It was very egalitarian. And etc., but also part of that was this racial purity. And so some of the thinkers at the time argued, that over time, the German people, at this point, they're identifying the German people, nationalistically, as opposed to the Germans as in the Germania, which was all of these tribes of Germanic-speaking languages. There's lots of Germanic, languages that are not Germans culturally, but by this point, the Tacitus book has been really identified as, a national founding document of the nation-state of Germany. And then in the 20th century, there is this drive with the National Socialists, the Nazis, then to go back to a pure time that they could become. They decided they could, if they tried hard enough, they could actually repurify their nation, their people, back to what it was originally in this idealistic past, which of course didn't exist. And then of course we get Nazism, and we get the horrors of the genocides against undesirable people like Jewish people, homosexuals, disabled people. All of these people ran counter to this narrative that they had built around the Tacitus Germania. So that's the overview of what the book is about. So my thoughts, though, taking away from it, was really this idea of the background narrative. You know, there's a background narrative that gets constructed in culture that most people aren't even, you know, like I'm not even aware of all the background narratives going on that I'm taking for granted. There's background narratives in the culture that people just assume and that get built on over time. And this book really illustrated to me how that can get constructed over centuries and how it can really go awry in a really dangerous and destructive way. And so to me, it was really a good sort of illustration of being aware of what that background narrative is in your culture that you live in, and always, you know, questioning it. The book points out, there were always other voices to this narrative that got built around the National Social, the Nazis, even as far back as the Enlightenment, that was really, you know, pointing out, well, you know, linguistically this doesn't fit, or the other thing was the Tacitus book, this sort of description of these Germans as the barbarians was a common, some of the features that he lists actually are listed for Egyptians and other quote unquote barbarians. So it was sort of a standard Roman literary tool of describing barbarians, or who they considered people who weren't Roman. So there were always people who were pointing out things like this, but they didn't have the same impact in culture, you know, unfortunately, as the other voice, which ultimately, building over, you know, one thing led to another, led to another, led to another, till we wound up with the Volkish movement wanting to purify their people. The blood, you know, the biology of their people, and that meant getting rid of people who didn't fit that narrative. So that was my big takeaway from this book. You know, I really enjoyed this. I read another book I love books about books that show me a book's travel through time and its impact across cultures, and as, you know, impact through time. I'm just going to show you another book that I read a few years ago that I do want to reread very soon. This is called The Swerve: How the World Became Modern. This is by Stephen Greenblatt, and this is concerning the book. It's actually an epic poem called On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. And this poem, when this work was discovered again during the Italian Renaissance, it was lost. One of these works from the classical world that was lost for 1,000 years and then rediscovered during the Renaissance, and really began, you know, modern science through our Western modern science. So I hope to get that reread in December in my month of rereads, The Swerve, because it's been about 5 years, I think, from what I could tell, since the last time I read that. But I love these books about books and their journeys through time and how they impact ideas, and really how they build this background narrative that we have, that we all need to be aware of and be questioning constantly, so that we don't fall into the trap of so many people in Germany in the 1930s. So I'm going to leave it at that. Until next time, take care. Bye.